I never imagined a simple game could ruin my life. But when I lost that bet with my boss, everything changed. It wasn't just a harmless wager, it was a ticking time bomb, and I was holding the detonator. What he wanted in return? Something I couldn't ever tell my husband, something that would destroy us both if he ever found out. As my boss grinned, I felt the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't a joke anymore. The stakes were real, and I had no way out. My mind was racing, heart pounding, and the reality of what I was about to do hit me like a freight train. I knew I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. How could I ever explain this? How could I live with myself after what I was about to do? The secret already felt like a weight around my neck, and I hadn't even gone through with it yet. I had two choices: follow through and keep my job, or refuse and risk losing everything. But as I stood there, torn between my career and my conscience, I wondered, was it worth the price? It started as harmless banter between my boss and me. We had always been friendly, joking around during the long hours at the office. But one day, the conversation took an unexpected turn. We were discussing a work project, and somehow the topic of making a bet came up. I don't even remember what led to it, but I found myself agreeing to something that would change everything. "Let's make it interesting," he said, leaning back in his chair with that confident grin. I laughed it off, thinking it was all in good fun. We'd made silly bets before, about office deadlines, game scores, little things. But this time, the stakes were different. I didn't realize how serious he was until it was too late. The challenge was straightforward, and I took it without hesitation. But when I lost, the smile on his face shifted. There was a tension in the air, one I couldn't quite place at first. Then he said it. What he wanted in return wasn't money or a favor. It wasn't something I could brush off. My stomach dropped as I heard the words leave his mouth, and for a second, I thought he was joking. But the look in his eyes told me otherwise. This was real, deadly serious. I laughed nervously, hoping he would back off, that maybe he was testing me. But he didn't laugh. Instead, he just stared at me, waiting for my answer. My mind raced. How could I have been so stupid? I felt cornered, trapped in a game I didn't even know I was playing. There was no way I could tell my husband about this. He'd never understand, and I wasn't even sure I could explain it to myself. I had crossed a line, and now I had to face the consequences. My boss made it clear that backing out wasn't an option. The bet was a done deal, and I had lost. The air around me felt suffocating, thick with tension and fear. It wasn't just a stupid office game anymore. It was my life. And now, I had to figure out how to get through this without losing everything I had worked for. But at what cost? The consequences were already starting to unfold, and I wasn't ready for what was coming next. The ride home that night felt like a blur. My mind was spinning, replaying every moment from the office, the bet, the smirk, his words. What was I supposed to do? I had put myself in an impossible situation, and now I had to decide whether I was going to follow through or face the fallout. I glanced at my phone, half expecting a message from my boss. The knot in my stomach tightened. My husband was waiting for me at home, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. How could I look him in the eye and pretend everything was fine? How could I keep this secret from him? I had never lied to him before, not like this. The guilt was already tearing me apart. But the alternative? It terrified me just as much. If I backed out now, what would happen to my job? My career? I had worked so hard to get to where I was, and losing everything because of one mistake felt unthinkable. But was going through with it really the better option? The thought of my boss holding this over my head, using it against me whenever he pleased, made my skin crawl. I felt trapped, like no matter what I chose, I was going to lose. That night, lying next to my husband, I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding. He shifted beside me, pulling the blanket closer, completely oblivious to the chaos in my head. I couldn't shake the guilt. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see my boss's face, hear his voice, feel the tension of what was coming. I had always thought of myself as someone who did the right thing, who stayed loyal, who could be trusted. But now, I wasn't so sure. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and no matter which way I turned, I was going to fall. What scared me most wasn't just the possibility of losing my job, or my husband finding out. It was the fear that maybe, just maybe, I had already gone too far to turn back. That even if I walked away now, the damage was done. The clock ticked in the darkness, each second pulling me closer to a decision. But could I really live with the consequences either way? The moment it was over, I felt sick. I couldn't even look at him. I grabbed my things and left the office without a word, my heart pounding in my chest. The cold air outside hit my face like a slap, but it did nothing to wake me from the nightmare I had just lived through. What had I done? I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the steering wheel, my hands trembling. I couldn't believe it. I had gone through with it. There was no turning back now. The guilt wrapped around me like a vice, tightening with every passing second. My thoughts raced, spinning in circles. How was I going to live with this? How could I face my husband tonight, tomorrow, ever again? I started the engine and drove home in a daze, each mile dragging me closer to the moment I dreaded most. Walking through the front door, pretending everything was normal. The weight of the secret pressed down on me like a suffocating fog. When I got home, my husband greeted me with a smile, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I smiled back, but it felt like I was playing a part in a movie, disconnected from reality. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and paranoia. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting it to be him. I avoided eye contact with my husband, afraid that he'd somehow see the truth in my eyes. The smallest things set me on edge, a question about work, an innocent comment about our relationship. My boss acted like nothing had changed, but I knew everything had. He had something over me now, and that terrified me more than anything. At night I lay awake, haunted by what I had done. The guilt gnawed at me, an unrelenting ache in the pit of my stomach. I replayed that night over and over in my head, wishing I could take it back, wishing I had never made that stupid bet. But it was too late. The damage was done. I started to distance myself from my husband. Not because I wanted to, but because the guilt was too much to bear. I couldn't stand the thought of him finding out, of seeing the look in his eyes if he ever knew the truth. But the lie I was living was tearing me apart, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the charade. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of my secret only grew heavier. Every smile I forced, every lie I told pulled me further from the life I once knew. I thought I could live with it, pretend it never happened. But the guilt was eating me alive. I was becoming a stranger to myself, and worse, to my husband. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The lies, the guilt, the constant fear of being found out, it was all too much. My husband deserved better than this, and deep down I knew I did too. But how could I possibly tell him the truth? How could I risk everything we had built together? The fear of losing him was paralyzing, yet I couldn't keep going like this. One night, as I sat next to him, watching TV but not really watching, I made a decision. I had to come clean. I had to tell him everything, no matter the cost. I didn't know what would happen, whether he would leave me, forgive me, or if our relationship could survive it. But I couldn't carry this burden any longer. In the end, secrets always find a way to surface. And when they do, the consequences can be devastating. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. See you in the next one.